Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Thunder Force. So what Thunder Force is essentially about is basically it takes place in this world where in the 80s there was this cosmic ray that came down from the sky, and it basically gave all of these like sociopaths and horrible people superpowers. So there are all of these supervillains that have kind of like overpopulated the world and things like that. And years later, we center on this character of Emily Stanton, who she is this very successful scientist and things like that, and she has actually developed a way to add superheroes into the world. And one day she reunites with a child friend of hers, Lydia, who she has since drifted apart from. And after a mishap, Lydia ends up gaining the superpowers, and Emily soon realizes that the two of them are going to be really the only hope in trying to restore the world and take down these supervillains once and for all, but also get a chance to maybe reconcile between her and Lydia. So Thunder Force, I was very much not looking forward to this film. I mean, anytime there is a Melissa McCarthy comedy, already there's like a bit of a red flag, because very rarely do I actually like the comedies that she's made. Really, the only ones I can think of are like Spy and The Heat, but other than that, everything that she's partaked in, I just have not really been a huge fan of. Obviously, drama-wise, like that's a different story, but like comedy-wise, she just never really delivers for me. But then, knowing that it's directed by Ben Falcone, that's another huge red flag, and the film itself just looked super obnoxious and just didn't really seem like it was going to be anything that special. And yeah, this movie sucks. I don't think it's that surprising to hear that this film is really not very good at all. Thunder Force is easily one of the laziest, and I think one of the most missed opportunities to satirize superhero films that I have seen in quite a long time. Once again, it's another misfire from Ben Falcone, but we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And I have to say, going into this movie does have a pretty good cast, but a huge red flag immediately settles in, and that, of course, is Melissa McCarthy. Going into this film, I don't really feel very good with her in it, because a lot of the time she's in Ben Falcone's films, it's solely because the fact that Ben Falcone is directing it, and it doesn't really matter if Melissa McCarthy is suited for the role or not. And I can say with complete confidence, this is easily one of her worst performances yet. I mean, the character of Lydia could not be any more obnoxious, and I get it that the character is supposed to be kind of dumb and not very competent in what she does, but McCarthy is just so irritable in this role. It really just brings out all of her worst traits, I would say, as an actress, because I do think she can be generally funny, but when she's constantly playing these like buffoons for characters, it just isn't very fun to watch. And she especially was just really grating on my nerves throughout this whole movie. I really couldn't stand her here. But I was at least hoping that, having someone like Octavia Spencer in there could maybe save the movie, and I'm sorry to say, I didn't really think she was that great here either. Now, I get it. She's supposed to play more of the straight man. She's supposed to play the one that is, reacting to a lot of what McCarthy's doing, but the problem is two things. One, it feels like Spencer just did not really have any good comedic timing here. Every joke with her is really falling flat. Two, her and McCarthy have no chemistry throughout the entire movie, and this is very surprising to me, because I thought at least Octavia Spencer would be the saving grace of this film. Octavia Spencer is a phenomenal actress, and you put her in anything, she usually is a standout, but here, Spencer is very stiff in this role. It just didn't really feel like she knew how to really go about this, and I can't really blame her. She's not normally in a lot of comedic films, but I would think Spencer, being the great actress that she is, would be able to adapt to this, but she really isn't. She seems like she's very lost in this role and almost kind of uncomfortable with what she's doing. I was not very impressed by her performance. I felt that in general, she just really didn't want to be here, and her more serious demeanor does not work well with McCarthy's very over-the-top and hamminess that she's really going for. I did not feel they had very good chemistry at all, and when they don't work together, everything else really does fall flat as a result. As far as the rest cast goes, I will say they're not as bad as those two. Those two are definitely the worst part of the movie. I actually was a fan of Octavia Spencer's daughter in the film, who's played by Taylor Mosby. I thought she actually gave a pretty good performance. There's not a ton of her here. I actually wish there was more of her in the film, but for what she has, I think she actually does give a pretty strong performance, and definitely seems like someone that in better films I think could really shine and really stick out. And in this movie alone, like, even when the film is really not working, she still really does a good job here. I will say the one real saving grace of this film is Jason Bateman, who plays the Lobster King, and it's mainly because it's not even really the lines that he's saying or anything like that. Who plays this character of the crab. He has these crab hands, and it's not even really the lines that Bateman was given, but he is just so naturally funny, and because of that, I actually found myself really digging this character. They do a lot of really fun stuff with him, and I thought in general he was the only person in the movie that seemed to be putting any real effort into it, in the sense where it felt like he actually was helping the film, and I thought he definitely did give a pretty strong performance here. I was enjoying him here overall. Bobby Cannavale is Bobby Cannavale. He's basically just playing this over-the-top sort of supervillain, and it's fine, I guess. He's not terrible or anything, but it doesn't really work. Melissa Leo is fine here too, same with Kevin Dunn. Klementieff is honestly kind of horrible in this film. I've liked her in other stuff, but here, I don't know what happened, but it just fell so incredibly flat what they were trying to go for with her character. She's like the henchman of Bobby Cannavale, and she just in general is just not really working in this role. In general, acting-wise, really not that impressive here. There's a lot of good actors, but most of them just don't really get the time to shine, and it's definitely one of the lower points of this movie. But now let's get into the directing and the writing, because this is where we get to the things that really brings this movie down. Of course, the directing by Ben Falcone. I mean, I've said it with countless other films. I just don't think he's a very good director. I don't. And the problem is not at all, and I have heard people say this, it's not the fact that he's constantly working with Melissa McCarthy. Obviously, yes, I'm sure he's a lovely husband to her and that they have a really nice marriage and things like that. But the problem is he has yet to really prove that he has any real chops as a director, because anytime he's tried to delve into something that's a little bit different than what he normally does, he completely falls flat. And the same very much goes with this film. I mean, you can look at this and you can look at, say, like Tammy or Life of the Party or Super Intelligence, and I don't really think you would notice that much of a difference. There's nothing really different that he brings here. The superhero style especially, I don't think he really understands how to direct a superhero movie. It just feels very flat. It almost feels like a fan film at points with the way that it's directed, but it's directed by someone who's not a fan of superhero movies. At least it very much felt that way to me. And the comedy especially really does fall flat. Just in general, his directing is very much lacking here. It's about as horribly done as his other films. Again, I've said it so many times, but his directing is just really not great, and I don't know what he needs to do. I don't know if Falcone has a future outside of just directing films that his wife is in, but he really needs to do some serious thinking, because constantly he's been putting out all of these projects, some of which are different than others, and when none of them deliver, clearly he is the problem here. And I think definitely Falcone really needs to do some work if he wants to be a serious director, because he really has yet to prove to me that he has any real chops as a director, that there's anything really specific about him that that there's anything talented about him, because I just haven't really seen it yet, and sadly I still do not see it within this film. But the screenplay of this film as well, I will say there are some ideas here that aren't bad. There's actually a pretty good setup when it comes to our two lead characters of Emily and Lydia. You get the sense that Emily was someone who did not take school as seriously. Lydia was someone that did not take school as seriously, but Emily took it very seriously. She became very well educated. She was very scholar in that way, and she ended up going to this school, and this kind of got them to drift apart a bit. We saw that, Lydia was kind of directionless in that way, and I think that's a pretty good setup. But the problem is, aside from that, they really don't do too much with these two characters. It's a very good setup, but the payoff is very basic. It's as simple as they hash out their differences, and that's kind of it. And I think it could have gone into something a little bit deeper than that. They could have really touched upon the idea that Lydia maybe saw Emily as, someone that she wanted to be. She saw Emily as, who she couldn't be, or Emily ended off things with Lydia because of the fact that Lydia didn't care as much, and so she had more freedom and opportunities and things like that Emily didn't get. And I think they could have dived into something more there, but they just really didn't. And so as a result, I just found myself not really caring about these two, and I feel like I very much should. So already that plot line isn't really working as well as it should. But then you factor in all of this plot line of this comet coming down from the sky and giving everyone superpowers, and it really doesn't feel like much has changed within the world. And I feel like if there have been supervillains that have been running rampant around Earth for years, you would think that there would be some significant damage to the world, but it doesn't really feel like anything's happened. It feels pretty much like business as usual. So you're just kind of wondering, like, why is Emily even so concerned about, restoring the world to its normal self? Because it just doesn't feel like much has really changed. I mean, let's take Bobby Cannavale, for example, as a character. He can be very threatening. Yes, he's someone that he's constantly just killing his henchmen one by one. There's this gag with him that they do. At first, it's kind of funny, and then it's very much not. But again, he's supposed to be the big villain in the movie, and what is his big evil plan? He wants to run for mayor. That's literally it. Like, he's so overly concerned with running for mayor and becoming, taking over the world and things like that. But it's distilled to something that just feels so minute, when there should be something a lot bigger at play here, especially when clearly this is big enough for Emily to create this, like, super serum of sorts that turns you into a superhero. They don't really give a good reasoning as to why we should give a shit. So again, that doesn't really work. The world building is very weak in this movie, and that's something that I think is important in any superhero movie, even ones that don't take themselves very seriously. You need some good world building, and this film in general just does not really have it. It doesn't really tell you, like, why I should be invested, why I should care about what's going on. They don't do a really great job with that. And so the movie as a whole, I think, really does fall flat. And so the conflict itself, it just feels a bit weightless. And again, it doesn't help that the two characters we're following throughout this movie are very unlikable. Lydia especially is such a fucking idiot in this film. She's told very early on in the film to not touch anything, to not mess with what Emily is doing. And then she does the complete opposite, and that's what gets them into this situation. And it's just infuriating to watch. And I get it that, like, she's supposed to be drunk, she's supposed to be, like, directionless within her life, but it's just not very fun to watch. You're just looking at her like, why are you so stupid? Why are you deliberately going against her wishes? It's just really annoying to watch. And then they have these jokes in the movie that are, one, completely irrelevant. Like, there's this whole scene of Lydia just randomly going off about Steve Urkel impressions. It goes on for like 2 minutes, and this is something that they should very obviously cut from the film. There is no reason for this scene to be in here, but it just keeps going, and they don't do anything funny with it. There's another scene where they're meeting Emily's parents, and Emily, for some reason, suspects that they're a lesbian couple, and they don't again, there's nothing funny that's being said here. It's just an idea, there's no joke, and it just doesn't really work. And it feels like, again, this is another problem with Ben Falcone being attached to these movies, is that because it's his wife, he doesn't really want to cut, and he very much should, because the joke already isn't working, but they keep it going on and on for like 2 minutes straight, and it's really hard to watch. The first half of this movie especially was insufferable to get through. I could not believe just how much I was hating this film in the beginning. And again, it'd be one thing if the Lydia character had funny things to say and do, but Ben Falcone thinks that Melissa McCarthy just like falling all over the place and like just saying the most obnoxious things is somehow funny. And it's just very clearly not. She's a huge annoyance throughout this entire movie. And thankfully it does get better in the later half of the film, but for a while it is so rough to get through. And again, I don't understand how Falcone isn't recognizing at this point that this is a problem, that he doesn't know when to cut. He doesn't know when to maybe change things up. That's one of the things I appreciate about Superintelligence. That movie is actually worse than this one, but what I did appreciate about Superintelligence is that Melissa McCarthy was not playing just like an idiot in that movie. She was playing someone that was actually a little bit more competent, but here, she's just back to playing a complete idiot that just doesn't listen to simple instructions, and it's just so infuriating to watch. There's nothing funny about what's being done here, and it's headache inducing at points, and I really hated every second of it. They also really rush through a lot of what's going on in terms of their powers and how it's supposed to work and things like that, so you're never really all that invested in what's going on, how they get these powers. It's all just done in a really cartoonish way, and not in the sense where they're trying to parody other superhero films, because I did get the sense that's what they're trying to do, but what are you specifically trying to satirize here? What are they specifically trying to pay tribute to? It's very hard to tell, because it just doesn't, again, feel like Falcone really understands what makes superhero movies so great. He's so overly concerned with just these random jokes that aren't very funny, so again, it doesn't really work. Again, the only real saving grace of the film in terms of the screenplay is Jason Bateman's character. He comes in and he actually has a pretty good arc. There's some funny jokes with him about what he does, having, lobsters for hands. I think there's some really funny jokes in there, but I also can't tell if that's more because Bateman is just naturally funny or if those are actually well-written jokes. I really couldn't tell, but either way, that was the stuff that was making me laugh. That's the stuff I was a little bit more invested in. And I thought they did an all right job with that. But other stuff writing-wise, there's a subplot with Emily and her daughter that I'm supposed to be invested in, but they don't really spend any time on it. So again, there are good ideas in this film, but I just didn't feel any of them were executed in the way that they really should have been. So overall, the film really falls flat in terms of the screenplay. It's definitely one of his weakest yet, so that really doesn't work. The cinematography in this film is really not good either. There's a horrible CGI shot, especially of Melissa, especially when Melissa McCarthy's character is using her power and we see it in full display. It is absolutely awful. It's so awful to look at, and I couldn't believe that this was the VFX shot they left in the film. I mean, I'm sure this film was cheaper than most, but like, you could have at least added a bit more of a budget to it, and they didn't even try, it feels like. There are some costumes that don't look terrible. Like I said, I like Jason Bateman's character designs and some of the things like that, but that's really it in terms of cinematography. It doesn't really stick out to me. The world itself, it doesn't have a specific feel to it. It just kind of looks like our world, but there are superheroes, I guess, and that's kind of it. They don't really do anything specific in terms of the cinematography here. The score is also fine. Not really much to say about that either. And the editing, the film is only around 100 and it's only around 107 minutes, and it's an absolute slog to get through. And again, it's mainly because of the fact that so much of what's going on, we have so little investment in. We have so little understanding of what's actually going to happen, of what's actually going on in this movie. And so they just don't do a lot of good stuff with that at all. There's also this really weird twist that happens in the film, and it comes right out of nowhere, and you think it's gonna be the kind of thing that like really impacts the story, but it just kind of happens, and they don't even do anything with it, and you're like, what was the point of this twist? Why did you even introduce it if you're not even going to, you know, if you're not even going to build upon it? But they don't, and I'm just kind of sitting there like, why did you even write this in? It's yet another thing that he could have easily cut out of this movie and nothing really would have been changed, but because he did not do that, it just sticks out like a sore thumb, and it's yet another problem that Falcone, I think, really does struggle with as a writer. Like I said, Thunder Force, it's not the worst movie that Ben Falcone has done. It has some really good ideas in there, but ultimately it falls very flat. It has two actresses that both are very talented but don't really work well together in this movie. It's riddled with a ton of unfunny humor. It has a lot of moments that I think could be very well written, but it just isn't written in the way that it should be. The world building is very weak. You never really feel the threat throughout this entire movie, and once again, it's just another disaster from Ben Falcone that further proves that maybe he needs to just get away from directing movies that his wife is in, or maybe he just needs a break. You know, maybe he just needs to sit back and think about what is going wrong, because there's clearly, again, a bunch of ongoing problems within his films. There are things that we've seen throughout his movies that have been problems for a while, whether it's these jokes that are ongoing that are completely unfunny, or him overusing certain things, or him not really, you know, giving any style to the film. I feel like this is the perfect example of what he really needs to think about. These are things that maybe he can improve upon to become a better writer and director, but for right now, he clearly has not done that, and as a result, we have yet another insufferable film from him. Thunder Force was pretty much a huge disaster, and I am going to give it a D+. But overall, guys, my review of Thunder Force. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie. All love your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.